Hello, my darlings, and welcome to 24 Days of Advent Adventure. Today is day 18. Almost at Christmas. Day 18 we begin. We're going back to 1993, 31 years ago, when I was 17 years old. Squatters by Jill Bennett. That's what we're doing tonight. Yes, it's late. Doing a horror story late at night for you. Sandra Biggs is feeling very, very unloved. Her mother is a dead loss, and her new stepfather is an absolute useless lump of lard. What a disgusting, horrible man he truly is. She's feeling very insecure and wants to have a loving family for Christmas. Unfortunately, that just isn't possible for Sandra Biggs. Poor darling. She has an older brother, Tony, who left home at 17 years of age because he didn't get on with his new stepfather. No surprise there. Tony dreamt big. Tony dreamt of going to London. Tony wanted to get a really good job, a great apartment, and a new life for himself. Unfortunately, Tony hadn't been very lucky. He'd sent his address to his sister and told her he lived in Hammersmith. Poor Sandra, she felt so upset that she decided that she had to go. The gaping hole of depression inside her was so great and so bad, and she was so sad that she had a big fight with her mother. Her mother slapped her across the face, and at that point Sandra decided she'd had enough and she was leaving, and she was going to go and find her brother in Hammersmith in London. So off she went on her train journey to find her brother. What a shock she gets when she finally turns up where he's staying and realizes that the place that he's in is a dilapidated old dump. What makes it even worse is that when she decided to stay with him, they offered her the only bedroom. And that, my darlings, is where Sandra's problems start. Who or what is living in that bedroom and is hiding behind the walls and is scratching day and night, begging for something or someone to find it? Is it a ghost? Is it an evil spirit? Who knows? I'm going to have to read the book and find out. Oh, Sandra. Oh, Sandra and her depression and the scratching in the walls. The combination. I'll read you a little bit. Sandra Biggs stared at herself in the bathroom mirror. It was Friday night, 5 days before Christmas, and the parties had begun. Sandy, she hated Sandra. It made her feel all scratchy. Had been planning her outfit for days. She bought a new lipstick and blusher to match and was going to do her hair like the model on the cover of Top Girl. With her black leggings and a new cerise and lime green top, what a combination, she'd show them. So there she was, all decked out in a new outfit, and it hadn't made any difference. Her pale face wasn't really improved by the fashionable brownish lipstick, and the blusher on her round cheeks stood out in artificial triangles. She had pulled her light brown frizzy hair into a ponytail on the side of her head, and frankly, she knew she looked silly. She was 14, plump, and a serious spot was about to erupt on the side of her nose. Dracula's grandmother! Sandy shouted at herself to keep the tears at bay. She flung the hairbrush at the basin. It made an almighty clatter as it bounced out and landed on the floor at her feet. Sandra! Her mother's voice floated up the stairs. What are you doing up there? Sandy didn't reply. She grabbed at a tissue and viciously wiped the makeup off her face. It looked blotchy now, but she didn't care anymore. Smarting and feeling desperate, she came heavily down the stairs and reached for her old school anorak. She'd go to the party anyway. Fat old Sandy. Her mother stood at the sitting room door. Here, she demanded, where do you think you're off to? The moon, Sandy said rudely. You cheeky little cow, said Sandy's mother, looking at her daughter with the certain smile Sandy dreaded. You look a mess. Something the cat sicked up. I don't think you should be let out. You never said. I don't have to tell you everything. The old empty cavern began to open up inside Sandy when her mother said things like that. Sometimes it grew so deep, Sandy thought she'd fall into it and never be seen again. Sandra, you come here, her stepfather's voice joined in harshly, and her mother stood aside to let Sandy take a reluctant step over to the sitting room threshold. A large man rose from the sofa and moved towards her. He had lost most of the hair at the front of his head and wore a thick moustache to compensate. He'd been her stepfather for 2 years now. Sandy had had time to practice her sullen, silent response to almost everything he said or did. She hated him. She hated her dad too for walking out on them, and quite often she hated her mother for bringing this man into her home. Don't you give your mother lip. He held a can of beer in one hand and wiped his mouth with the other. You'll do that once too often, my girl. On the other side of the sofa, the TV was showing an early evening game show, and a large plate of sandwiches stood on the low table in front of it. Sandy glanced took it all in. They hadn't offered her any food, but by now she was used to being treated as if she didn't exist. Her mother was completely wrapped up in her new husband. So why does it bother if I want to go out? She thought. She just wants to make a show of being a mum to impress him. The black cavern inside her stretched wider. Was there a time, Sandy wondered, when her mother had been any different? She glowered at them from under her brows, sullen and silent. Her stepfather put his free arm over her mother's shoulder, and they leaned against one another and stared at her. Sandy couldn't keep it up. She stared back at each of them in turn. I'm off then. Don't bother to wait up. You take a step outside that door and you're for it, her mother said half-heartedly. Sandy knew she was just keeping up the pressure. Her mother didn't really want her company. They'd only row. Yeah, her stepfather almost sniggered. You never know what could happen to a little raver like you, Sandra. His look clearly said that no one would even bother molesting her. The knife struck home when Sandy fought back. Well, at least I'm young, she shouted at them. I've got my life ahead of me, I have. You're just a couple of middle-aged has-beens trying to be 20. I'm sorry for you, you hear? She unhooked her shoulder bag from the banister and turned away. Come back here, you! Her mother sprang forward and grabbed her arm. With her other hand she gave Sandy a stinging blow across her cheek. The man leaned forward and held his wife around the waist. Steady, Marge. Let the little cow go. What's it to us? Sandy held up a hand to her flaming cheek. The rest of her face was white. That's it then. To her surprise, she didn't shout. She turned back to the front door and opened it. Her mother felt unnerved by her unnaturally quiet voice. Where are you going now? She asked, vaguely alarmed. Sandy looked at her. As I said, she continued in the same quiet voice, don't wait up. I'm going somewhere. I'll be welcome. You won't have to bother with me again. Ever. All right? The chill December air from the street filled the little hall they were standing in and made them all shiver. Sandy stepped through the door and with infinite care closed it behind her. She let out a long breath as her steps took her numbly down the familiar street. When her road joined the high street, she stopped. Her head was still ringing from her mother's blow, but it was the slow accumulation of hurts, deeper and stronger, that which had finally burst like an overfilled balloon. She meant what she said. It wasn't an idle threat. Her parents wouldn't feel threatened anyway. She doubted if they would take it seriously until she hadn't come home by breakfast time. And then what? She couldn't imagine what they'd do. Anyway, that didn't concern her now. She felt quite calm. She was going to Tony. His last phone call had been in October. This time he'd given her the address of a new squat he was in. She fumbled in her bag to find the scrap of paper with the address on it. It was very crumpled and had a wine gum sticking to it at the corner. 61 Portello Road, Hammersmith. Popping the wine gum in her mouth, she suddenly thought, I haven't got any of my things. But she wasn't going home to get them. Not now. Right. Sandy headed for the station, thinking as she went. She had £8 and a bit of change in her purse. That would cover the ticket to London and also underground fare. After that, Tony would take care of her and tell her what to do. Tony Biggs, Sandy's older brother, had left home in much the same way as Sandy 2 years before. He was 17 then, and Sandy 12. Look, Sand, Tony had said to her when he knew he was going, there's just not room in the house for him and me. The rows with their stepfather had been terrible. Tony had told her he was going to stay with a friend who had a room in London, find a job and then get a place of his own. Although he was 5 years older than her, she'd missed him sorely. They had clung to each other when their father left and their mother had begun to lose her grip on things. Sandy felt adrift and lonely when Tony went and his phone calls were few and erratic. The winter evening settled in with a chill east wind. London was only 3/4 of an hour away as her train sped through the darkness. Sandy felt a spurt of excitement. She wondered if there would be other people in Tony's squat. There usually were. Would they want her? Tony would see she was fine. No problem. People filled the London platform as Sandy got out. She brought her favourite chop bar from a newspaper stand and asked the woman where the underground was. You blind or something? The woman barely looked at her. She was standing by the entrance. Squashed with masses of others on the huge escalator, Sandy began to feel afraid. It's miles down, she thought. As she asked her way on the Hammersmith train, she felt the old black hole coming at her again. In spite of the brightly lit compartment, she shivered. Tony, please, please be there, she prayed. With unsteady hands, she tore the wrapper from her chop bar and took a bite. Its sweetness comforted her, so she took another and chewed it hard. The black hole faded a little, but didn't go away. As you can see, Sandy is having an awful lot of problems. She thinks she's found salvation with Tony and his friend. What's his friend's name? Rufus Hound. Yes, Tony and Rufus. She thinks she's found a sanctuary there, and Tony and Rufus have said, take the bedroom at the front of the house, and we'll stay here at the back of the house. You can have it all to yourself and a bit of privacy. But as I said, that's when Sandy's problems started. And Sandy, poor dear sweet Sandy, what is that thing that's behind the wall that's scratching, trying to get out? Oh, my darling, get some help and get it quick before you become really ill. So, my darlings, that concludes the mysterious Christmas tales of day 18. And I do hope you've enjoyed the scratchy. Is it a rat? Is it a ghost? Is it a monster? Could it be a vampire? Who knows? You'll have to read the book and find out, won't you? Well, my loves, happy readings and enjoy. And if you like what I've done, you can give me a thumbs up. And if you really like what I've done, you can always give me a follow and come back for day 19 tomorrow with goodness knows what. Take care, my darlings. Bye-bye.